measurements.
That's okay. Yes, we do. Yeah.
Mr. Longfinger.
I have everything, Mr. Fingers. How's everybody doing today? Good. Awesome. Lots of thumbs up. That's great. Lots of non-interaction, which is not so great. We're going to give you a hard time, but that's all right. For those of you who are new to The Recipe, welcome. My name is Patrick. I'm the executive chef and the owner here at The Recipe. I'm not wearing my whites today because I'm not teaching today because I'm not a baker. And I have an actual scientist because baking is chemistry, let's be honest. To me, it's just black magic. I don't know. I don't understand it. But sourdough in particular is one of those things that is highly technical, and there's a lot of things that can go wrong throughout the entire process. So today we're going to talk about not just like how to maintain and feed your starter and how to take care of it, but then also a proper 24-hour loaf for sourdough, because it is a long period of time if you do it the right way. Are we going to talk about some shortcuts too, maybe?
Sure.
No, we don't do shortcuts.
I mean, I have shortcuts that'll save you like hours.
There you go. I mean, that's a thing.
Yeah, it's a thing.
And then we're also going to talk about a couple discard recipes, because when you feed your starter and then you discard half of it, you can still use that to bake with. You just can't really use it for a loaf. But there are other delicious things like pancakes, crackers, tortillas. We're doing muffins.
Anything that's baked, you can put sourdough in.
Right. Sourdough is just a natural yeast, right? And so we just maintain our own natural healthy yeast, and then that way we don't have to worry about going to the store and buying yeast when we need yeast for things. So without further ado, I think I will hand it over to Alex and Noah, who are going to walk us through the class today and kind of give us some pointers and tips along the way. Please ask questions that you have. Please stop us if you want us to repeat anything. Like I said, it is designed to be interactive, and I fully recognize that in a class of this size, it can be kind of intimidating because it might feel like you're asking a stupid question, but the only stupid question is the one that doesn't get asked. And if you need a little bit of courage, the bar is open. That always helps me. So, yeah, but without further ado, let's get it started.
Okay.
Thanks, y'all.
All right.
Yeah, so like Patrick said, I'm Alex. This is my husband, Noah.
Hi.
I've only been making sourdough for like, we've decided that I've been making sourdough for like a year and 3 months. So I did not get into it during COVID. I told Andy that I'm like a reverse hipster because I get into things after they're already cool. But so yeah, so this class is I'm gonna apologize in advance because this class is a little bit all over the place. Just because of the timing and things and the way things have to go. So I'm going to do my best to refer to where in the process we are for any given step. But yeah, so the first thing I'm going to do is shape a loaf and put in the oven so that we can eat it in a little while. So that's the last step. So we're going to start at the end and work our way backwards. So this is kind of what you're probably you're used to seeing, like this type of a sourdough loaf in the store or at a farmer's market or whatever. I will still teach you how to shape that, but we're actually going to do a pumpkin for today because it's fall and Rachel thought it would be cute. So now if you're really inspired, you can do this for your Thanksgiving centerpiece or something. So this is just a circular sourdough. You can see that it is this shape instead of this shape. So this is a circle. So I'm actually gonna put more flour on it. So, okay. The first thing I did earlier today was I cut 8 pieces of string that were like my forearm and a half in length, because that's long enough. And then I tied them all together so that it's kind of laid out like an octopus here on my baking mat. And then I'm just gonna dump my sourdough onto my floured baking mat, and it's going to come out very nicely. And then I'm going to, when you're trying to do a shaped loaf that's like tied with strings, you want to be sure to like extra flour it, because otherwise your strings do bake into it a little bit, and so if there's plenty of flour on it, then you have a better chance of getting it out without ripping everything apart. And you can also, I've seen like tips that you could put oil, like olive oil, on the strings if you have trouble. I have successfully been able to get them off. So I'm not going to oil them, but if you have trouble with it or you're worried about it, then go ahead and do that. So I'm just going to kind of knot these. You can see that I'm not like really pulling them up to where it's like really pulling the sourdough in, because the sourdough is going to rise into the strings anyway, so I don't want to restrict it too much.
So you're doing that to make the indentations to
Look like a pumpkin.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, yep. So this is not a required step if you're just making a circle. So yeah, I'm just kind of gathering them up and tying them in the middle so that it's cute. Because then it will rise in the shape of a pumpkin in the oven. And I just found this online, so there's lots of tutorials online if you are like not confident still. Okay. So then I'm just gonna kind of snip these off and try to make sure that they're all kind of overlapping each other in the middle. They look good to me. Okay. And then, okay, this one I'm not happy with. I'm just gonna adjust these so they're kind of mostly square. It's gonna be a little lopsided. And then I'm gonna take, so I don't have a lame, because I haven't gotten one. And I just use a razor blade to cut my sourdough. You either want to use a lame or a razor blade. A lame is just a razor blade on a stick, that's all it is. And so the reason you want to do that is because a knife is not going to be thin or sharp enough to make it's going to squish your sourdough if you try to cut it.
Unless Patrick just recently sharpened your knife.
And then you might be okay. I'm going to use my razor blade. So typically when I do a sourdough, I like to do one really deep cut like this to try to like tell it, one really deep cut like this one here to tell it where I want it to rise, right? Because I did these cute little designs like with the leaves over here, and unfortunately it split on one of my leaves because it didn't do what I wanted it to do. So I will usually do like one really deep cut where I'll go like the full depth of the razor blade down to try to encourage it to break there. And then for my design cuts, I really, like, you just barely want to scratch the surface because the sourdough is going to rise so rapidly in the oven that if you want like cute little designs, you just like want to tell it, no, please don't break through my tiny little scratches. So I'm going to, because this is like a cute loaf, I'm not actually going to do any deep cuts, and it's going to be okay. It might, when I've done this in the past, it explodes like 1/8 of it will like explode out, and it's like kind of funny looking, but it's fine. So I'm just gonna do cute little narrow cuts, but just if you're gonna do designs, you wanna definitely have one deep cut in there somewhere to kind of encourage the sourdough to not explode in an ugly manner. So I'm just gonna do, like you can see, I'm really just barely scratching through the top of this flour. And it's because I still want this to kind of look like leaves instead of like an explosion. And we'll see if it cooperates. Unfortunately, the nature of sourdough, one of the beautiful things about sourdough is that it does kind of have a mind of its own, so you can try to tell it what to do with mixed levels of success.
Yeah. You just give it suggestions, really.
Yeah, you're like, please, like, this might be cute. Maybe do this thing. And then it'll be like, we'll see.
Mm-hmm.
Oop, that one was deep, so it's probably going to explode there. Okay. And then hopefully that will be cute. It will be cute nonetheless. So this is now going to go in the oven where we've had our Dutch oven preheating for about an hour. Now, one of the mistakes I made when I started, so the household that I grew up in had mixed feelings about preheating your oven. Because really, you know, like if you're baking cookies, you can just like stick them in there when it's still not preheated and just like adjust the cooking time, and it's usually mostly fine. So when I started making sourdough, I was like, preheat for a full hour? No way, like that's stupid. It's not stupid. So the reason you want to preheat your Dutch oven and your actual oven for a full hour is because you want the whole interior temperature of the Dutch oven and everything in there to be at 450 degrees. Or I think it says 500 on here. in order to get like really good oven spring. Because we're trying to stress the yeast out so much by putting them in like this insanely hot bath that they explode, which is what turns this from a pancake into a loaf of bread, right? So yes, actually preheat your oven. We typically do it for like an hour, or honestly like till I start smelling the oven and I'm like, oh, that's been on for like an hour.
We tend to forget about it, and then we're like, oh yeah, we're making
Oh
sourdough.
yeah, we're supposed to make sourdough today. Distraction. Okay.
You always put parchment in?
So you do want to put parchment in because it allows you to transfer it more easily, right? Because like you have to at some point lift that piece of dough off, and if you lift it with your hands, it's going to kind of stretch everywhere. Huh?
You have that on your.
Yeah, flip the dough out of the proofing basket onto a floured piece of parchment or silicone baking mat.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So any questions about cutting the dough and putting it in the oven? That should be pretty straightforward. That might be the most straightforward part of the class. Okay. So now let's talk about sourdough starter care. So you all are going to go home with 20 grams of sourdough starter from my starter, which will hopefully stay alive. And you're going to be wondering, how do you feed it? So the golden ratio of sourdough is 1 to 1 to 1. So for every 1 gram of sourdough starter, you're going to feed it 1 gram of water and 1 gram of flour. I just use unbleached all-purpose flour. There are certain people who like to use, they have all rye starters where they use rye flour. I just use AP flour, and if you only have bleached flour at home, your starter will not die. But maybe transition to buying unbleached, because technically it has slightly more protein in it, so the yeast likes it a little bit more than it likes unbleached flour. But unbleached flour, again, is not going to kill it.
And that's why you would use rye, because it has more protein.
Yeah, so rye and wheat flour also tend to have more. So rye flour, wheat flour, and like bread flour all have more protein content in them. And so that's why certain recipes will call for different flour types, because it'll give you the desired. So like I feed my starter with just AP flour, but I make bread with bread flour, because A, that's the recipe I found, and B, because it's a little better for the outcome of your bread. Okay, so in our starter is a natural yeast culture. And the way that bacteria and yeast grow is something called a growth curve, and it looks like an S. And so at the bottom is when the yeast are kind of like waking up, you know, they've been kind of dormant because there's not any food for them to eat, so they kind of went to sleep. So they're waking up and they're like, oh my God, there's food again? Oh, thank goodness. And so they're slowly telling their friends to start eating food, and then they get to this exponential growth phase where they grow really quickly, and this is where they're doubling at their maximum capacity, right? And then as all the food kind of gets eaten, they kind of decay again and slow down, right? So you want to bake with your sourdough starter when it is in that peak growth phase, because that's when there's the most activity going on and your yeast are like, we're ready for more food. We haven't like started shutting down again. So that generally happens at different periods of time depending on the type of flour you're using. So for your bread recipe, you'll notice it says it'll take about 4 hours. I think that's on the front page. Yeah. So yeah, let sit in a warm place for 4 to 5 hours. So that's when you're feeding your sourdough starter to get it ready to bake with, right? So it's going to take between 3 to 5 hours, depending on the temperature of your kitchen, for that yeast to reach the peak growth period. If you're feeding it with AP flour, it takes about 8 hours to reach that peak growth period. And I've never used rye, so I don't know. But the reason it takes a little bit less time is because you're feeding a little bit of wheat flour in addition to the AP flour, so the yeast is going to grow a little more quickly than with just plain all-purpose flour. So I have several samples here of different starters that I fed at different periods of time, just to kind of give you an idea. So this one was fed last night. So when I pass these around, I'm gonna pass them around so you can take pictures and stuff if you want to. We can see if we look like at the top of it, there's like some bubbles, but it's kind of flat. It's not very, it looks like the bubbles have kind of been like smooshed down on the sides. It doesn't look like there's a lot of stuff going on right now. So this was fed last night. So this is officially in like the decay phase. So it's already, the yeast is already going back to sleep because it doesn't have any food. This 8-hour sample I fed this morning. So this one is actually going to be about right after its peak because I had it on a heating mat, so it went faster than anticipated. But we can see there's a lot more aeration. There's a lot more like large bubbles that we can see in the side of the glass. We can see that the top of it is kind of domed still, and these bubbles are still kind of rising up and popping in the top of it. And so we know that this is like pretty good to bake with. So this is, again, a little past when I would prefer to bake with it because it was a little hotter today than I anticipated. But this would still be fine to bake with. We're really looking for that concave shape, so like a dome shape on the top of it to make sure that it hasn't started to sink and like compress those bubbles again, right? And then I have a 4-hour sample, which I also did. So this one should just be starting to get to, yep. So we can see that it has some bubbles coming in the top. It still has a dome on the top, and it has some good aeration in the middle. But these bubbles are still a lot smaller than the bubbles from the 8-hour sample. So this one is just now starting to get into its peak growth phase. So I would maybe give this another hour before I wanted to bake with it. And then this one is 2 hours. We fed it a couple hours ago, and we're gonna see it doesn't look like there's like anything going on in there. There's not any bubbles. Like it just looks like nothing's happening. So that's kind of how your starter will look as it goes through its different periods of growth. And I'm gonna pass these down and we'll go in a circle and then we'll get them at the end. So if you want to take pictures, you can take pictures.
So once it goes bad, it's bad?
No, you just have to feed it again.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
This
It doesn't-
12-hour one that's kind of not good, we just have to feed it again?
Yeah,
Yeah,
you would just
yeah.
feed it again to like, and then try again in 8 hours. So if you miss your window, it's not the end of the world. You
okay.
just try again tomorrow.
Okay.
But yeah, so when I send you home, you're gonna have 20 grams of starter. And so we have to remember our golden ratio. So with your 20 grams of starter, when you get home, you're gonna feed it with 20 grams of water and 20 grams of flour, right? And what?
No, sorry.
Okay. Oh yeah, that's what he's signaling me for. I will demonstrate because maybe. So yeah, this is literally what you're gonna go home with, this little 20 grams.
So you go home with 20 grams, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not 40 grams?
No, that's just for the recipe. When you're actually like, when you feed it tonight, you'll have your 20 grams of starter, you'll get your 20 grams of flour, and then your 20 grams of water.
8 and 4. 8 and
Yeah, you just put
4
flour
are
and
the
water.
ones
That's
that are
feeding it.
good.
That's its food. Yeah.
Yes.
And it's all
Because you want to see the dome top. It was the 12-hour one is really
So-
flat.
So yeah, so you'll measure.
So
how
yeah,
much
when
starter
you
have,
feed your
and then
starter,
you'll do
it's
equal
literally like
parts
this. You're
of
literally
flour
just
and
gonna
water.
take your flour and water and starter and put it in your little container, and you just mix it up until it kind of looks like that. You just want the flour to mostly be dissolved in the water. It's still going to be lumpy, that's fine. It doesn't need to be perfectly smooth, but you're just trying to get the flour dissolved so that the yeast can access it in the liquid phase. Yeah, yes. So if you're really impatient, so like some days, especially now that we're in winter, I do try to warm the water ahead of time. I don't warm it a lot. I just like in the sink until it feels warm on my hand. It doesn't really matter. The yeast is just going to grow slower in a colder environment. So like I generally, so this is my actual starter. This is the starter that stays in my house. You do not need a jar this big. I promise. The only reason I need a jar this big is because I have to be able to make enough sourdough to run this class. So unless you're going to make sourdough every single day for the rest of your life, you probably don't need a jar this big. So generally what I like to do is I keep my starter in the fridge because I don't bake, there's only 2 of us, I don't bake very frequently. I maybe will make a loaf of sourdough every other week or so. So whenever I want to feed this, because I still try to feed it every 2 to 3 weeks, that's literally just one time every 2 to 3 weeks. I pull it out of the fridge, I feed it with the flour and water, and then I leave it on the counter overnight so that it can grow at room temperature, and then I chuck it back in the fridge. I have before, like when we go on vacation, sometimes I'll forget to do it the night before we leave, and I'm like, oh gosh darn, I haven't fed the sourdough in 3 weeks, I need to feed it before we leave. And I will feed it and then throw it in the fridge immediately. And the yeast will still grow at your refrigerator temperature. It's just probably gonna take them like a week to go through their whole, or 48 hours, 36 hours, something like that, to go through their whole life cycle instead of 12 hours, right? So they will still function at colder temperatures. If you're really impatient though, where's our heating mat? Oh, so like today, especially in the winter, I tend to do this because it gets pretty cold in our kitchen. So this is just a heating mat that we have for plants, or if you have like a heat pad that you use for your back that you can plug in, I will plug this in, and then once I've mixed up my starter, this guy, I'll just like stick it on here so that it's warm, because this heats to about 70 degrees. So then it'll keep this nice and warm and it'll grow faster. So that's one of my time-saving tips, is that that'll generally take an hour off of how much time you need to reach the peak phase. So instead of 4 to 5 hours, I'm consistently within 3 hours to be able to bake with for the bread.
Measure that before you feed it?
No, I'm really lazy. Yeah, it doesn't. So here's the secret. So you always want your flour and water to be in a 1-to-1 ratio, but technically your starter doesn't have to be in that ratio. So if you're really good, where's my discard jar? So whenever I get ready for this class, I start collecting discard in this jar so that I have enough for all of you to take home.
Which discard is just inactive.
It's just
sourdough
inactive starter. It's not trash. It's not. This is gold.
You can still feed it.
Yeah, you could feed this again for sure.
And you could use it to make bread.
Yep. But so every time, so this jar I try to keep about 100 grams of starter in here. So every time I feed 100 grams of water and 100 grams of flour. Now generally I'm pretty lazy and I do make a lot of things with discard, so I won't always measure exactly how much is in here, but I usually feed 100 grams and 100 grams regardless. Like there could be 300 grams in here and I'll still just chuck 100 grams of each in here because I don't want to measure it. But if I'm really good, like when I'm getting ready for this class, every time I feed this, I pull out 200 grams and put it in here so that I know there's 100 grams of starter left in here.
So can you tell me how you measure that then? So how do you know you have 100 in there?
If I really, so I try to clean this jar about once every couple months, because like the sourdough will like kind of form like a crust around the top when it dries out. And so whenever I clean this, I try to do a really good job of I'll pull 100 grams out and then, or I'll actually measure how much is in it when I put it back in and then feed it correctly.
Okay.
But if I know there's 100 grams in it, so like for instance, Tuesday, I knew there were 100 grams in here because I cleaned it. And so, and this is how dirty it got in 3 days, 4 days, whatever. So I knew there were 100 grams in here when I cleaned it because I had put everything else in this jar to start saving. And so I fed it with 100 grams of flour and 100 grams of water. And then the next day I needed to feed it again. So I pulled out 200 grams because that's just how much flour and water, and I put the 200 grams in here. So I knew there were 100 grams left in here still. So.
You just keep doing that.
Yeah, so like when I need to make a lot of starter, I'll leave this on the counter and I just feed it once or twice a day. Because you can feed it up, since it takes 12 hours to go through the life cycle, you can feed it up to 2 times a day. So when I need a lot of discard, I'll feed it once before I go to work in the morning and then once before we go to bed at night. So the longest I have left this in the fridge without touching it is 4 weeks. I've heard of people who've left it for like 6 months and still gotten it back going, if you want me to be honest. They will, okay, so generally if I leave it for like 3 weeks or more, 2.5 weeks or more, it forms like, there's like a liquid layer on the top that's called hooch, you know, like, so that's just the ethanol that the yeast is producing when they're in the anaerobic digestion phase. And so it's kind of like black and...
Don't worry about that term.
Yeah, but it's like black and cloudy. It's like not cute. I mean, it is literally hooch. I mean, it's ethanol. So, I mean...
What do you do with that?
So I mix it back in because it makes the starter more sour. If you have a lot on your discard, though, and you're not planning on feeding your discard, you might just dump it out. So, like...
Is discard basically like another starter?
It is another starter, so this is what you're going to go home with. And you're going to be able to feed it, and it's going to be fine. No, because I want it to be in the inactive phase. Because like for certain recipes, so like for these tortillas that we're going to make and the crackers, you want inactive starter, which is discard, right? So it's nice to keep, so it's nice to keep it in a separate jar so that you know that this is always going to be inactive. Yes? Again, I mean, because it is a live culture, eventually it will go bad. But if it doesn't smell bad and it's not green, red, yellow, or any of the colors that it's not supposed to,
mold does not appear in your...
It's going to be fine.
You're going to be fine.
I would say that I frequently will keep this for like 3 or 4 weeks, but I'm continually adding new yeast to it, so it kind of keeps the culture less like crusty. If you just have a jar that you haven't added anything to, I maybe wouldn't keep it more than like 4 or 5 weeks. Like if there's something like in the back of your fridge that you forgot about for 4 or 5 weeks, I maybe wouldn't use it at that point.
Does it matter if it's a glass jar or plastic?
So it can be glass or plastic, you just don't want it to be metal. So this is an old kimchi jar. I now hoard these. And then this is just, it's like, it's a glass jar.
It's the Ball brand jar.
It's like a cookie jar. It was supposed to be a cookie jar. I thought it was pretty cute. I got it for something else, but yeah. So yeah, it can be a plastic jar or a glass jar. The Weck jars are really nice for it. They sell those at, what now is it Shops on Clark, something like that. Formerly known as ZW. Those are really nice. So the one thing I will note about when you want to choose your jar, it is generally advisable that if it has a twisty top lid, you leave it slightly unscrewed whenever you feed it. The yeast do produce a little bit of carbon dioxide, right? That's what forms the bubbles. They're not making so much carbon dioxide that you're going to make like an exploding glass jar. Like that's really not the issue. But it's just to kind of give them less pressure so that they're actually staying at atmospheric pressure than having to fight against any like additional pressure that they produce. So you just would like leave it kind of like slightly unscrewed and then screw it back when you're ready to put it in the fridge. But yeah, I mean, you can see mine still has a metal lid. I'm not really worried about it interacting with this. But you wouldn't want like don't use like metal bowls when you're making sourdough and things like that. And I try to only mix it with like silicone spoons and spatula, or a wooden spoon or a spatula. Because since it is slightly acidic, over time it could leach some of those metals into the culture itself. I mean, I don't know how much time that would actually take. It's not that acidic, but like in general, it's just better practice to not use metal things. Okay, any questions about starter care? We can go over it again at the end, like exactly how much you need to feed and stuff like that when you get home. But
yeah, and this starter care is like, you're not baking with it, you're just maintaining
this is
it.
just to keep it alive.
You're just keeping it alive, that's all that is.
Okay, cool. Okay, then I will move on. So yeah, so that's basically, that starter care step, that's the first step of you making your bread. Yeah, so that's like the activate your starter step. Again, this one, it's still a 1-to-1-to-1 ratio. It uses a little bit of wheat flour instead of all-purpose flour, but that's just for this recipe alone. When you're at home, just feed it with all-purpose flour. It's cheaper. Okay. Yes.
What you're going to give us, you use that all of it, right? And then you add flour and water to all of it.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Not
You
just bits of it.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
you're going to take 20 grams home, and you're going to add 20
Okay.
You're
and
at
20. Yep.
20, 20, right.
Okay.
And they only take 20 out to bake.
No.
No.
Not-
It depends on your
that's
recipe.
dependent.
That's recipe
This
dependent.
recipe requires that you have 40 grams. So you could technically, if you fed your starter tonight, you would have enough to bake with. But it's recipe dependent. This requires 60 grams of activated starter
Okay.
Yeah.
to bake.
So you're gonna want to keep feeding your starter, keep making it bigger and growing,
Yeah.
so you can like when you feed it, you can actually use that to bake.
I would say like a good size of starter for like a normal at-home baker is like 40 grams that you maintain, right?
Okay.
For 40 to 60 grams that you maintain. I think 100 is too much for normal people. Okay. Oh, the other little trick. Where's my 8-hour sample? Did they come back up here?
Yes. Here you go.
Okay. So the other trick for knowing if your starter is ready to bake is something called the float test. Basically, this is just proving that our sourdough starter has enough air in it and is ready to bake. And it's literally exactly what it sounds like. We're just gonna take our activated starter and we're gonna see if it floats in water. And we can see that that floats nicely in this thing of water. So it has enough air in it so it's ready to bake with. That's nice if you're like really not super confident with like telling. But yeah,
And that's only 4 hours.
That's
this
the
one was the
8
8-hour
Oh, 8
sample.
hours that you started.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, this one was this morning.
And
But
you
yeah.
started with 20 too.
This one did start with 20. Yeah, so this size of jar was how much? That's like 60 grams of activated starter was how much was in this when it went around.
And that's enough for
That's enough for, yeah, for most people. Maybe, I don't know. I mean, like, choose your own adventure, man. But,
Okay, man.
but I would say that 60 would be like a manageable amount. And then, because like for this bread recipe, right, you need 40 grams. So if you're maintaining a culture that's 60 grams, then every time you pull out 40 grams, you just feed it 20, right? And so that would leave you enough that you would have some wiggle room, right?
So where does the discard come in at this point?
This is just, well, we're going to use it to bake some stuff, right?
Is there are you getting rid of any of that?
Not generally. I don't generally just throw it away.
So you don't normally have a lot of that?
No, I mean, like I might have a lot of it, but I usually try to bake with it instead of just throwing it out. Just because, I don't know, it seems like such a waste, you know?
You're
just throw it
you're
away.
keeping it alive for something. Might as well
Yeah,
use it.
yeah, exactly. Okay, so the next step of our sourdough is dissolving and mixing it with flour. So I'm not going to demo that step because it's pretty straightforward. But the reason we dissolve it, basically you're just going to like mix it with your hands, right? And dissolve your starter in here so it looks nice and cloudy. The only reason we're dissolving it is just so the yeast is evenly spread out throughout the dough. And then you're just going to put your flours in here. And so that's what I did earlier with this dough. So this is what it looks like after it's been sitting here for like 45 minutes. But yeah, so this just has the flour, the starter, and the water. The reason we don't add the salt at the very beginning is because, right, so salt is going to dry out the individual yeast particles, and we want them to acclimate to their new environment before we pull out a bunch of moisture. So really it's just like to make sure they don't get too stressed out. And so the reason I'm going to demo the salt part is because like it is kind of like awkward a little bit. So basically we're trying to fold the salt into the dough. The other thing with sourdough that's different than normal bread is you always add water. So like you're gonna notice that in all of my kneading step, I always get my surface wet, I get my hands wet instead of using flour like you would for regular dough. And that's just because we wanna make sure that they stay in like a really nice moist environment. So yeah, so I just folded this salt in here and then I'm just gonna try to stretch and fold the dough around the salt until I don't feel any big pockets of like, because I can feel the grains of salt, right? Because it doesn't feel like dough. So I'm just going to keep stretching and folding this until I'm not feeling any grains of salt
You got a
anymore.
question?
Yes. This was just kosher table salt. We've also used sea salt, like it's one of them has different minerals in it, but no. I would say
it's not going to affect the bake of
yeah,
the bread.
yeah. It's only 7 grams of salt. I don't think that it would affect it that much. Like, I mean, maybe if you use like chili lime salt, you might notice that. Okay. So yeah, you're just gonna keep like, and if it gets too sticky, just put it down, get your hands wet again. Okay. And so yeah, it's just like a minute of doing that, and then it looks ugly, and that's okay.
And how long did that sit?
It was 45. This is longer than it should have. Usually you just want to let it sit like 20 minutes. I mean, 45 minutes is not going to hurt it, but generally I usually let it go 20 to 30 minutes before I add the salt in. Okay, so I'm happy with that. That's what it looks like. And then, okay, on the back, oh no, it's still on the front. So this is the 3 slap and fold. So this is after the, okay, yeah, so after the pinch and fold method, we begin a series of slap and folds to develop the gluten. So that's what I'm going to demo now. So,
yeah, well, she does most of the baking, and I kind of just help around. Cause
he knows how to do all the steps.
I know how to do all the steps.
So when I'm at work and I'm like, oh wait, we need to make sourdough. Can you do that?
she'll be off at work, and I work from home, so that makes it easy. So like, oh yeah, by the way, can you do the slap and folds? We're like, okay, yeah. So for like the next
so like
hour
I got to go to yoga this morning, and he still did all the prep for
yeah,
this.
exactly.
What a nice job.
Yes. So the slap and folds, okay, so there are 2 methods of kneading sourdough. There are stretch and folds, which are much more gentle, and that just kind of, it literally is like, stretch it, and then fold it over, and then stretch it. I like doing slap and folds because it's more fun, and it makes me feel like I'm doing more to the gluten. So yeah, the whole point of this is just to develop the gluten, and it's literally exactly what it sounds like. I'm just gonna slap, and then roll it on itself. And then I'm just gonna do that like 4 or 5 times until it's not stretching anymore. So still a little stretchy. And again, I wet this before I did this so that it doesn't stick too much. Okay, so we can see it's starting to stretch a little less. And so yeah, that was like 5 or 6 times, and that's good enough. And then you just try to pull it against itself to give it some tension, and then put it back in its little bed until another day. And so you're going to do 3 of those, and you're going to do them at 30-minute increments. So from the time your sourdough starter is activated, so like once it's reached that peak, you need about 3 hours of you like not leaving your house. Or you can be like, I've seen people like, I don't know if it's just a joke. I'm sure it's just a joke, but people like bringing their sourdough with them in the car because they need to go somewhere like in the middle of their slap and folds. But yeah, so you need about 3 hours. So I try to time it, like I'll get him to start sourdough starter around noon so that when I get home, I can like do the 3 hours of slap and folds and salt and mixing and all that stuff. So yeah, because you need to mix it, and then 30 minutes later you salt it, and then 30 minutes later slap and fold, slap and fold, slap and fold. So it's a little bit of time, but then that's all the active time. I mean, I say that's like 3 hours, but like that's all the active time that you need for your bread. Okay.
Is 30 minutes in between?
30 minutes in between each, is that not?
It might, yeah, it's there.
Okay, good. Maybe it's not. I don't see it is. It's not. Write it in there. So repeat the following steps 3 times, and then I would write at 30-minute increments. Okay, so then you begin. Oh, good. Came out cute.
Was the lid off the whole
No, we leave the lid on for the first 20 minutes and then pull it off. So the reason we leave the lid on is because it creates a nice steam bath so that you get kind of a crust on the outside, and then you pull the lid off so that crust can brown, right? Okay, I did have a question before the class started. If you don't have a Dutch, this is what a Dutch oven is. It's just a big pot. It's either stoneware, this one is cast iron, but it's either cast iron or stoneware. If you do not have a Dutch oven, it is possible to make sourdough still at home. I've had mixed success, but basically using a steam bath. So what you would do is you would have 2 racks in your oven. On the bottom rack, you would put in a big casserole dish filled with boiling water so that it creates a really steamy environment for your sourdough. And then, yes. Yeah,
Yep,
that's the one that just
that's
went
the one that we started with.
Yes.
See, it did turn out cute.
How long does that take?
It's only 30 minutes. It's only in the oven
It's only
for
a
30
30-minute
minutes.
bake.
Yep.
Everything else takes
It's
forever.
the 24 to 36 hours you have to wait, you know?
Yeah, it's a lot of waiting around, waiting for it to develop.
Yeah, so that's done. What were we asking? What did somebody ask me?
About
I'm so
Dutch
sorry.
oven. And how to cook
Oh,
without
the
it.
Dutch oven. So yeah, you're gonna put your steam bath so it gets really steamy, and you're just gonna bake it on a stone or a baking sheet. And then after 20 minutes, the same way you pull off the lid, pull the steam bath out so that it has 10 more minutes to kind of, you know, get nice and crispy. So yeah, so that's what I would do if you don't have, yeah, he's gonna cut those off. They don't, I leave it a lot. Well, actually, I usually actually do them right away because I'm really impatient and I just want to see how cute it is without the strings. But yeah, you could definitely leave them. It wouldn't be an issue.
So is there a size-wise that I can't, like, is any one too big? So like if I make
There's none that's too big.
Okay.
No, I would say there's ones that are too small. I think this is the same size we have at home.
Yes, it is.
No, I mean like
Oh.
loaf-wise. So if I
Oh.
put in 20, 30, what's my biggest that I would put in a Dutch oven?
So this is actually this recipe that you have is actually a relatively small loaf. It's usually good for for one day it's good for like maybe 4 or 5 people, but for us it's good for like 4 or 5 days.
Yeah.
If we have toast in the morning or something. So this is like a smaller loaf. A lot of recipes that you'll see online are gonna use this one only uses 300 grams of flour. Most of the recipes online tend to use about 500. So they're gonna be like a size and a half larger than this size. Yeah.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
you would put that in that.
It's still your baskets are still gonna be a fine size. Like I think the biggest loaf I've done in this basket was 500 or 600, and it also had chocolate chips in it, so like it was really big. And it was delicious. But yeah, so okay, that's baking. Shaping. We can talk about shaping. Okay, so we already did our little cutting and that thing. So this is after it's been sitting all morning. So you can see if this is the size that it is when it starts. Can you look at me instead of Noah? I know he's more interesting. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
So this is the size when it starts, right? So this is after all of our slap and folds. So this is the size. So it's gonna get a bit larger. It doesn't typically usually double in size. This one has been sitting a little longer than I might usually let it go. But you do see that we have some bubbles like in the top of it, like you would normal bread. And then, I can't flip this over. Bubbles in the bottom. So, and it looks very whipped. You can see like it's very loose, it's very relaxed. So like I'm pretty comfortable that this is ready to bake with. Or shape, right? Because then we have to let it sit again. Okay, so this is slightly choose your own adventure step. This is kind of when you choose what shape you want your dough to be. I'm going to teach you the rectangular shape because it's a little bit more, there's a little bit more than this one. So we're going to do that. So the first thing, shaping is in 2 steps.
It's a little more involved.
Yeah.
Okay.
So shaping is in 2 steps. You're going to do and that's because we want to give the yeast as much tension as we can during the shaping process, because that's going to help us get a really good shape and a really good rise in the oven. So the first step is going to be a pre-shape, and if you're going to do a circle shape, you're just going to do this twice. So the pre-shape, we're just going to kind of take our dough out, and we can see it's very loose. So obviously I don't want to shape it right this second because I'm not going to have much control over it. So I'm going to try to stress it out a little bit by giving it this tension. And so this is literally, you're just going to pull all the sides in to make a circle. And then you're just going to give it all that tension, you just kind of work it in a circular pattern until it's kind of seals itself. And you can feel, because like, I can feel that now it's like getting more springy, the gluten's kind of waking back up. And now if I poke it, instead of being, you know, kind of loosey-goosey, it's kind of holding, we can see that it's holding its shape, and then it's kind of springing back when I poke it. And so then I'm gonna let that sit for another 30 minutes before I do the final shape. And again, if you're gonna do a circle shape or a bowl, is that how you say it? We'll say that's how you say it. If you're gonna do this circle shape, then you're just gonna repeat that. You're gonna spread it out into a rectangle and then fold it back into a circle and do that just twice instead of once. Okay. So if you're feeding your discard a lot, then you're gonna your starter a lot, you're gonna develop a lot of discard, right? Because if you're trying to remove that amount every time, you probably want something to do with your discard because it kind of sucks to just throw it in the trash can. It's not necessarily a safety tip, but for the sanctity of your oven or sink, don't put sourdough starter down the sink unless it's in very small quantities with a lot of water. So generally when we're washing dishes, I try to let everything sit so that it dissolves all the sourdough starter and then put it down the sink because it hardens like concrete and it will clog your pipes. And oh, online, I haven't clogged any pipes.
No pipes have been clogged, but if you just have like sourdough sit, it will harden.
Yes, it
like
the crust that's on the top of my.
That one's just crusty and flaky, but if it's like a big chunk of sourdough starter, it would form a block.
Yeah. The other thing that I didn't bring today that I would suggest if you're going to do this for Thanksgiving, you can stick a cinnamon stick in the middle of it to like do a stem, but I forgot to bring it with me, so I'm sorry. Imagine there's a cinnamon stick right here. So yeah, very cute. So, okay, so I'm going to show you 2 recipes, but I'm going to be honest, anything you ever want to make, like anything you want to bake, you can just Google blueberry muffin sourdough discard, and there will be a recipe on the internet. I'm going to give you 2 recipes that you can make at home. These are recipes that we make a lot and really enjoy, but literally anything. If you're like, oh dang it, I have so much discard, I need to do something, just whatever you're going to make that week, just Google it.
Yep.
It's there.
In other classes, we would do pancakes.
Yeah, so we have done pancakes before. We're going to do tortillas and crackers because we've been on a tortilla kick for the past few months. But yeah, so for the tortillas, it's pretty easy. I'm just going to add this butter into my flour. And then I'm just going to like make the flour into little, the butter into little pea-sized chunks, you know, with my fingers, the same way you do with things. Sourdough. The bread, yeah. So sometimes if I know that I'm not going to have much time, I'll make a double recipe because then I can just bake them one after the other. And then I'll freeze one of the 2 loaves. If I'm baking 2 one after the other though, I'll usually like because since you have to take the lid out, I put the lid back on it and let it heat back up for another like 20 or 30 minutes. I won't leave it for a full hour, but just to make sure the oven's still nice and hot. Okay, so that is our flour and butter. And then I'm gonna add the sourdough next. And that's because you're probably gonna need to adjust the amount of water you use based on whatever the hydration is in your sourdough. So like for instance, if you have discard that you discarded the hooch off of, it's not gonna have as much liquid in it, right? Because you just got rid of a bunch of liquid. So you're gonna need maybe more water. This one has not been, this one is just pure old sourdough starter, so I'm probably gonna need a little less than 100 grams of water. So I'm just gonna, basically what I'm saying is I'm gonna add the water little by little so that I don't oversaturate it and have to add a bunch of flour into it. That is the problem with some of the online things. Different people use different hydration levels in their sourdough. Like some people will do like a 60-40 ratio. Like I said, I do a 1-to-1-to-1, but different hydration levels obviously will result in different requirements for this type of a thing. So yeah, I'm just gonna fold the sourdough starter in here again, just like I did with the butter, to try to get it well mixed throughout. And then I'm just gonna add, based on what I did this morning, I think I need about half the amount of water that it calls for, because I already made a batch this morning, so I'm cheating a little bit. But again, if you add too much water and it ends up being really sticky, just add more flour back into it. It's not the end of the world. And we're gonna need some flour into it anyways, so it probably is a moot point. I need the flour.
I was trying to get ahead of the cleaning up.
Sorry. I need it to knead. Okay. On the tortillas? I'm doing the tortillas. I was like, I read it this morning. I thought it was right. That would not be the first time that one of my recipes has been erroneous. Yes, the crackers do not have any water in them. Okay. Yeah, you can move anything you want to move. Okay. So now that all this is combined, I'm going to knead it a little bit more to get a little bit of gluten developed. Again, this is not supposed to be a yeasted recipe. That's why we use discard. So like I'm not trying to develop the gluten so the sourdough can eat it. I'm just trying to develop it so that the tortillas are not like super dense or something. And so this will probably take me like 2 or 3 minutes to knead it nice and good, just so it's springy and happy and smooth. Really, I'm just looking for the texture when I'm kneading it. I'm not necessarily going based on the amount of time. It's just to make sure. This has butter in it, so this is like an enriched bread dough if you've ever made brioche or something like that. It would be similar. Okay. Okay, so yeah, so now my dough is pretty smooth. And so if we tap it, it kind of comes back a little bit from the pokes. So I'm happy with that. Okay, so when I make tortillas at home, if you want to make like burrito-sized tortillas, one recipe you can probably get 6 out of. 6 tortillas, 6 burrito, like the big guys, this guy. We usually are making tacos or fajitas at home, so I usually make 12 tortillas per recipe. And then today I'm gonna do 12. But earlier today, the ones that Noah has, I did like 28 out of one recipe. But those are little, so those are like chip size because we're gonna fry them and coat them in cinnamon sugar, and they're gonna be fun. So yeah. So I'm gonna cut this up into pieces. And then I'll show you how to roll it, and then I'll ask somebody else to do the rest of them. I already have one, thank you. I try to be prepared sometimes. Okay. Okay. So you're just gonna take your little cutter guy. And I usually just try to cut these ahead of time and then just have all the balls sitting there so that it's easier for me to roll them out. What did I say? I said 12? So 6 per side. Okay. Oh, well, that was 7, so sorry.
Doesn't matter, they're just small, you're good.
Okay, that's fine. And then if you want to, you can let them rest. So sometimes if we're trying to make tortillas, like to have fajitas, I'll actually make the tortilla dough the day before and then leave them in the fridge just in like a Tupperware container overnight and then cook them the same day just to like save myself a step. So that's fine. We've also done it where we'll make like 4 tortillas a day so that we get really fresh tortillas every day. And the little balls kept fine for up to a week. So,
Can you freeze those?
I haven't tried. I think it would be fine. I would freeze the tortillas though. We freeze
Yeah.
tortillas after we cook them a lot.
Okay.
I wouldn't necessarily try to freeze the raw dough.
Okay.
But we usually I'll make a double recipe and we'll freeze half of them. Oh, infrared. It's fancy.
I like that too. That's
I've been here for as long as this place has been.
it was infrared, so you didn't have to have the little stick.
Okay. So then whenever you're ready to roll out your flour tortillas, we cook ours on a griddle because it's more efficient. If you do a pan, it works really well in a cast iron or in a crepe pan because they get nice and hot, so you get good like browning, and also like it forms a nice pocket, so like it'll puff up really good. But we're just gonna do it on a griddle because it saves time because it's a lot of tortillas. I also do it on a griddle at home because I am impatient. And let me tell you, as soon as the first time I did them on a griddle and it didn't take me an hour to cook them all, I was like, oh my God, we can make tortillas way more now. It was so good. So these are the fajita-sized ones, so I'm gonna roll it out to about that size. You want them to be relatively thin, because like, I don't know, I don't like a super bready tortilla. I don't know how other people feel about that. But I prefer them to be a little thin. If you have a tortilla press, it doesn't work very well on flour tortillas, so sorry.
Usually we use a press for like corn tortillas.
Yeah.
There's like so much gluten in the flour tortillas that they don't want to
Yep.
go back. They want to shrink back, so rolling them is just a little bit better.
Yeah. And you can usually roll 4 in the time that it takes to cook them on the griddle. So yeah, so this is about the size. Wow, this is a really good circle. I never make them this good circular. So yeah, so that's about the size that you're gonna get from when you do 12 or 13. So yeah, and then I'm just gonna give these to you, and you can roll these
Excellent.
while you're bored. Okay, here you go.
I just had it here right now.
So yeah, he's cooking it at 300. If you cook it at too high of a temperature, sometimes they'll overcook on the edges.
Be careful, otherwise they get really crispy. I mean, that's what, like, you don't want to keep tortillas for very long because, yeah, they do get to...
They'll dry out.
They'll dry out. They get stale, right?
Yeah.
Like anything. But what's great about that is that you get to make tortilla chips.
Chips, yes. So yeah, so this is why we made littler ones, because since these don't have as much like surface area, they don't puff up, so they don't stay bready. So these are actually already a little stale, so they're gonna fry really nicely. Okay, so crackers. This is honestly a very similar process to the tortillas. It just doesn't have water in it. So I'm going to, again, kind of cut my butter in. Andy? Oh, sorry, you just dropped something in the oil. Well, I was going to ask if I could get another tray with parchment paper. Thank you.
So it's not really needed.
And then I'm just going to add the sourdough in, and this is going to be a pretty loose dough. You're going to be like, how is that going to turn into crackers? And it's because we're going to leave it in the fridge for a long time, so it's going to be fine.
See if I can make circles.
So, I am making a half recipe right now because I already made a full recipe earlier for us to eat. So just FYI, this is about half the amount of crackers that one recipe will make.
What did you have in your bowl first?
Flour and salt and butter. And then I just added the sourdough starter in, thank you.
And it says whole wheat flour. So
Yep, whole wheat flour. I would use whole wheat just because, like,
Make sure I'm not overcooking
I've
these
never
things.
made maybe it would make a difference. I just assume it's probably just for the flavor, because then it makes them a little like maltier. But choose your own adventure. I don't think it would hurt them to use all-purpose flour if you wanted, like.
You could sprinkle some everything bagel.
We did do everything bagel seasoning at our last class, and it was pretty good. Yeah. Like you could do plain crackers and then everything bagel on the top.
How can you go wrong with
Yeah, honestly. Okay, so, oh, and then this is the tar spice. So this is what I put in these crackers that you're going to taste today. It's like a Middle Eastern spice blend. But you could do this with anything. You said that you did them with like Parmesan and basil and stuff like that.
It was so good. And rosemary.
Oh, yes, and rosemary.
That sounds
Yeah,
delicious.
so you can make these with anything you want. So I'm just going to kind of fold the spice blend in here at the end. And you can also leave them plain and just add fun toppings. So it's really whatever you want. These are easy. And then what we're going to do to make sure that this sets up so that we can make it into a cracker is we're going to wrap it in plastic wrap. We don't have plastic wrap at home, so we just leave it on a plate in the fridge, and it's fine. Sometimes we cover the plate, sometimes we don't. But yeah, it's fine. So yeah, just kind of a rough circular rectangle thing, and then it just goes in the fridge for like 30 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes, just so that the butter can set, because otherwise, A, you won't be able to roll it out, and B, your butter's all gonna melt out when you try to bake it. Oh my goodness, I wrapped this one too well. Okay, so this is what it looks like after it's sat in the oven for a while. This one's been in the, not the oven, the fridge, sorry. So this one's been in the fridge for maybe a little longer than I would recommend, because it is gonna be kind of hard for me to roll out because it's pretty solid. I'm gonna get a tiny, oh, look, I have flour on my counter right here. Okay, so we're just gonna use that flour to flour this sheet, and then kind of put some flour there. And then we're just, honestly, because you don't want them to puff up too much in the oven, because, right, there is still yeast in here, so we want them to be relatively thin. It is nice to get a little bit of a, like, puff in the middle, but you just, I don't want too much, because you still want them to be like crackers. So we're going for, like, maybe like a millimeter thickness size, and vaguely rectangular in shape. They're made with love, and that's all that matters.
You don't need to have them perfect.
Yeah, there's a difference, right, between homemade and handmade. Yeah. So we're going for handmade, maybe. Artisanal. This is an artisanal sourdough class. That's what this is. These crackers are artisanal. Okay, so that's about a millimeter thickness.
So you rolled the tortillas with wood and then this one with wood?
Honestly, it doesn't matter. No, it was just because that one was easier to give to him.
Okay.
I only have one rolling pin at home, so it's the same one that I use on everything. I honestly, the only reason I use this one is because this gets so hard in the fridge, because it's been in there since like 1:30. It's easier because I don't have to put as much of my body weight on it because it's already really heavy. Okay. And then we're just going to take olive oil. This is plain olive oil. Again, if you want to use like flavored olive oil or something like that to make it like fun, you can totally do that. And then I'm just going to brush it or spread it out with your fingers. And I'm going to try to get mostly coated. But again, it's not perfect. And then I'm just gonna sprinkle it with flaky salt. Again, you could do a flavored salt, you could do like cheese on the top, you could do everything bagel seasoning, whatever you want. And then, nope, here it is. I'm just gonna cut these into like roughly squarular shapes. And mostly try to be the same size.
Where to cook it and then just break it so it gives.
This drawer. No. it's just a pastry roller or a pastry. Is it called a roller or a cutter?
I would call that a pastry wheel.
a pastry
There
wheel.
you go.
Thank you. Thank you for the correct.
Find those at this wonderful land.
Called Cook's Emporium. Yeah, so no, we have one at home. If you have a pizza cutter though, that would work fine if you don't want another tool in your kitchen. You just won't get the nice, cute little scalloped edges.
Since we're here, we're going to say it's not okay. You need to go to the store.
I have not, but you could definitely probably do that, I think. The only thing I would worry is that you'd get too puffy in the middle.
Okay.
Because you see, like, these crackers, they still puffed a
Yeah.
tiny bit, even though they're sealed on the
Yeah.
edges. So you could try it, but that's the thing I would worry about.
Well, I just wonder because it
I'll
make
let
it
it wait
more.
on.
They would be very rustic. I agree. I think that would be cute, but like peppermint bark.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
Or you could just cut them like this and pretend that you broke
We
them.
can have a personal. She doesn't just come to the house, so we can do a personal.
Okay, and then I'm poking them with a fork because I want them to let air out again so that they don't get too puffy. So it's like the same like when you poke your pie crust with a fork so that it doesn't get puffy. Or you put the beans in the bottom, yeah. And then I'm just gonna stick this in an oven at 350, and they're gonna bake until they're vaguely golden brown like this color. And it is 3:06, so at 3:30, they will be ready. Okay. Oh, our next shaping lesson. Okay, I was like, I know there's something else we still have to do. Sorry, Andy. Okay, so this has now been sitting for a little bit, probably not quite half an hour, but it's fine. So this is our final shape. So again, I'm gonna do the oval shape just because it's a little more involved. But if you wanted to do just the round shape, you would just repeat the same folding that we did before. After what? Okay, so the after you shaping is another choose your own adventure. So that's based on how much you want to let your sourdough ferment. So we have the bulk rise when it doubles, and then we shape it after that, and then it's the bulk ferment. So that's when the yeast is gonna really like digest that gluten and start producing a little bit of ethanol. The longer you let it bulk ferment, the more of the, quote, health benefits of sourdough you're gonna get out of it, right? So one of the health benefits of sourdough is that the gluten is partially digested, which means that if you're like gluten sensitive, not like celiac, but if you're gluten insensitive, it can like help with some of the bloating effects and things like that because it's partially digested already by the yeast. I like to let our bread ferment for 36 hours. So I will stick it, I will fold it, I will shape it, and then I'll stick it in the fridge and cook it a day and a half later. So usually I try to like bake my sourdough, or I try to like make it on Friday or Saturday, and then we cook it either Sunday morning or Monday morning. You can do as little as 1 hour. So you would shape it, let it sit shaped for 1 hour, and then stick it in the oven. And you could, I mean, the longest I've gone, honestly, is like 5 days. It's been in the fridge for 5 days, and it was still fine. So yeah, you can definitely like let it ferment as long as you want to. And that usually is done in the fridge. The only time you would let it bulk ferment on the counter is if it's only an hour. So that's, otherwise you're gonna pop it in the fridge and forget about it. So yeah, so we're just gonna fold this like hot dog style and kind of knit it together so that those ends don't come loose. And then I'm just gonna roll it and pull it towards myself. Because again, I want to build lots of tension, and then I'm going to try to tuck these ugly ends underneath it so that it's all kind of one nice shape. So pull. Okay. And I'm just trying to get it to be kind of an oval with mixed levels of success because I need a little bit more flour. Flour your surface better than I did because I was lazy. And then you get your handy dandy. So these are proofing baskets. If you do not have proofing baskets, it's okay. You can use a bowl or a bread tin. So before I got proofing baskets, like when I was first getting started with sourdough, I need more flour. When I was first getting started with sourdough, I was like, ugh, I cannot like spend money on this hobby because like I don't know if it's actually gonna work. I'm gonna actually just do this again because that was really bad. But yeah, I was like, I don't know if this is gonna like be a like long-term hobby. So I didn't want to invest money in it. So I found this handy dandy little trick. So if you do not have a proofing basket, you can either take a bowl like this, like literally a bowl, or a bread tin, and you can line it with just a dishcloth, flour the dishcloth, and it's fine. I would say that the proofing basket is one of the least needed pieces of equipment for sourdough. Jesus, Alex. This is just, sorry, this is very sticky. It is not usually, I usually flour a lot better, but this is just rough. Okay. It's okay. The seam is on the bottom. And so we're just gonna kind of like seal this in here and tuck it away. See, look, that came out perfectly. Tuck it away in its cute little basket. And again, this is the point where you would either let it sit here for an hour or chuck it in your fridge and leave it for between 24 to 36 hours-ish. I always cover it. So I will flour the top of this, and then I'm going to wrap it in a towel, just so it doesn't dry. I mean, it's still going to dry out. It's going to develop a crust, but it'll be a little less so than like if you just left it in the fridge. And then when you're ready to bake it, you're going to do the first thing that we did earlier today, where you pull it out and shape it, or pull it out, cut it up, and then stick it in the oven. And that's kind of the whole sourdough process. Okay, so what questions are there? Yeah, sorry.
Is it best to keep the hooch or throw it away?
I like to keep it because it makes it more sour. But like I said, you might not, like if it's in your discard jar, you might not want to mix it back in. Just because it's literally gonna immediately separate it back out. Like the only reason I keep it is because generally I mix it back in and then feed my starter. If it's in your hooch, it's just gonna, or not, if it's in your discard, it's gonna like separate back out immediately. Just because, you know, it's the off gas from the yeast. It's the byproduct. Yes?
Can you go back over to like when we take this home?
Uh-huh.
Are we feeding? Are we activating? What's that?
So feeding and activating is like the same thing.
Okay.
But so feeding is what I call like the maintenance step, like just keeping your thing alive. Activating is what I call it when you're getting ready to bake. But it's the same step.
So when we get home,
You're gonna feed it and add 20 grams of water and 20 grams of flour and stick it in a jar. If you don't have like a jar that you're ready to like commit to forever, that's fine. Just like stick it in a mason jar, like or a cup. Like honestly, whenever we activate our starter, we just use a glass, like literally a drinking glass. Overnight. So I would leave it on the counter overnight, and then in the morning, if you're like, okay, well that was enough, I don't want to think about this for another week, stick it in the fridge.
Then do I have 40? Because now I have 40, right?
Now you have 60.
Because
20, 20, 20.
Okay.
yeah.
20 grams starter, 20 grams water,
Yeah.
20 grams flour.
Oh, okay, so I have 60. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
what makes the discard?
It's just inactivated starter. So whenever you pull your starter out of the fridge when you're ready to feed it again, that's technically discard, but you're gonna reactivate it. So the discard is just like the extra weight that you put into it every time you feed it, right? Otherwise you like get 400 grams magically. I don't know how that happens.
So if I don't use it,
Yes.
it's gonna just,
You just will keep accumulating. Yeah, because you're always adding weight, right? So the discard is what you would throw away to get back to that baseline of 20 or 60 or whatever. You know.
Yeah.
Yes.
Instead of throwing it away, you could obviously.
I tried doing one
stuff.
from like scratch my
Yes.
starter, and it wasn't what I was following wouldn't be ready for like 14 days.
Yeah.
Is that because you're giving us an active one?
Yeah,
already?
so you're getting one that's a year old.
Okay, so it'll be ready tomorrow. Versus I won't have to wait the 14 days when I was
Yep.
doing my own.
Right.
Yep, yeah. So when I started my own from scratch, it was like, 2
Okay.
weeks or something.
And then are we dumping out half of it still? And that's your discard?
Yeah, so that's like you can, right? And so it depends on what size starter you want. So if you feed it tonight, you'll have 60 grams of starter in the morning, and that might be how much you want to keep your active culture at.
Okay.
So if that's how much, so when you have 60 tomorrow, you'd feed it again with 60 and 60, right? And then you'd have 180. Yeah. Yeah, so then you'd have 180 grams, and then you would probably throw out 120 into your discard jar every time you feed it.
Okay.
Yeah. So it just depends on how much you want to keep. So if you want to do half, then you could keep a 30-gram starter, you know. So it's whatever math you feel like doing. But if you're only throwing out half, you're still going to be gaining weight, right? Because you're adding 2 to 1 instead of 1 to 1, right? So.
Yeah, but I was doing this 1 to 1.
Well, 1 to 1 flour and water. But I'm saying your flour water to starter is still a 2 to 1. So if you were only discarding half of it, you really need to discard 2/3 of it to keep the same weight, right? Yeah. Okay. Other questions? Yes? So that's specifically for this bread recipe. So that is to activate enough starter to start the bread.
So with that, you'd have 120 grams roughly of your starter. You'd use 60 of that to bake your bread, and so you would have 60 grams left over for this recipe. You could make a second loaf,
or that would be your culture.
That would be
then.
your leftover discard that you
Yeah.
that you would save, and then you would reactivate that to make more bread in the future.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
so generally what I do is I keep this completely separate, right? So this one I only ever feed with water and all-purpose flour. And then to make bread, I pull out 40 grams out of this. So I usually feed and maintain this separately, just so I always know that I have starter or discard ready to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I usually just throw it away.
You could throw it away.
That stuff I usually throw away, but I do know some people will just literally activate their whole thing, and they'll keep whatever's left over. So that's why this recipe makes twice as much, because then technically you could just keep that 60 grams and use that as your leftover.
Your
yes.
leftover discard. Yeah.
4 weeks. Yeah, I think 2 weeks is better. Like I said, I've done 4 weeks, but then I kind of feel bad because I'm like, oh, maybe that was too long. But I would say 2 weeks is probably once a week in the fridge, because you're keeping it in the fridge, right? So as long as if you want to keep it on the counter, like if you're like, I'm going to bake every day, I'm going to keep it on the counter, you need to feed it once a day or once every other day. Like I think I left it out when we were on vacation one time and it was like 4 days. So it was fine. It was still on the counter. It was fine. But because you're at a warmer temperature, you have more risk of mold growing, right? You know, instead of just maintaining your yeast culture. And so, yeah, so if you're going to keep it on the counter, you need to feed it like every other day. The general recommendation is to feed it every week if you're keeping it in the fridge, but I consistently do 2 weeks. So I would say 2 weeks is about what I would recommend.
How do you keep track of how much starter you get?
I don't. I'm really lazy, but like I said, every once in a while, I try to clean this every couple months. And so whenever I clean the jar, I measure it and actually feed it correctly. So every once in a while, my starter gets fed correctly.
Otherwise, you could get a jar with measurement.
Yes, you could. So a good tip, so I can't get to them now, but back when I started, I have rubber bands that are stuck up here. So you can put rubber bands, if you put 2 rubber bands, if you put one of them at the level of your starter before you feed it, honestly you could do 3 rubber bands, but if you do one of them at the level of your starter when you feed it, one at the level like once it's doubled in size, then you know like how much volume to get rid of, right? Because you're trying to get it back down to that first rubber band. So yeah, you can do rubber bands too. They work pretty well. And then you don't have to measure. Yes. Yeah, you could bake bread tomorrow. So you have to start the process tomorrow, right? So tonight you're going to feed your 20 grams of starter. And then tomorrow, from that 60 grams that you have, you would pull 40 grams out to start for the bread, right? And then you would still have 20 left, and then you could make 60 again. No, that's the activated starter. So the getting the starter started, you only need 40 grams. Yeah. So yeah, you could bake as early as tomorrow. Okay.
Do you ever put ice in the bottom of your pan when you're baking?
Ice? No. Why?
It'll keep the bottom from getting really hard.
I've actually been adjusting my cooking times recently to try to help with that.
So it's not as hard on the bottom.
Yeah. We've just been cooking it a little less. But yeah, you just, as long as your color's good.
Your color's good. You're trying to get to a internal temperature between 200 and 212.
But if your bottom is hard, just turn your loaf on the side and cut down that way. Like cut down, if the bottom of your loaf is hard and you're having trouble like cutting through it with your bread knife, just turn your loaf on the side.
Yeah, what
Oh,
is it?
200. 200 to 212. But technically, it will reach that temperature before it's actually done cooking, and then it just kind of sits at that temperature. So really, like, the look of it and the sound of it is a better, like, it's a good thing to know, but, like, the look and the sound of it, you want it to feel light, like, when you pick it up, you want it to sound hollow, and you want it to be nice and browned. You kind of want to use all of those cues at the same time. But if you do want to play with your like cooking time or like the oven temperature, the internal temperature is a good way to like know if you're hitting that mark.
200, yeah, you said.
200 Fahrenheit.
200 Fahrenheit, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we probably are just about ready to start serving. But we're not going anywhere. So like if you have any questions that you didn't want to like ask in front of everyone.
Well, you didn't share the most important thing of all.
What is it?
You got to name it.
Oh yeah, you do have to name it. That's like a rule. So my starter is named Jigglypuff. What was yours named? Jane Doe, right?
Oh, that's mine too.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Now Jay Dizzle.
Oh, Jay Dizzle?
My
Okay.
favorite would be like Puff Daddy. That'd be good.
Okay, so for eating, we have, oh goodness. Okay, they're fine, don't worry. So for eating, we have crackers, bread, fried tortillas, which we coated in cinnamon sugar, soft tortillas, and then I think Andy made it's like a fermented
Not behind.
salsa?
Yeah, it's a little spicy.
It's a little spicy, but it's just it's like on the back of your palate, so it's still good. I would try it. Yeah, so,
I thought a starter is hand dry.
yeah.
How do you,
I have seen
the
it,
late 1852?
yeah, so like, you'll basically put your starter, if you have like a dehydrator, or honestly you could just do it on the counter, because it dries out so quickly, you would just like put it like in a smear on it and let it dry. Some people will do that to like save their starter in case they,
It's dry.
It came dry.
How do you add it?
oh, I don't, did they not give you directions?
I don't know.
So if we
I bought it
send
and I
this,
was
you
like,
should
crap, I
send
need to
us
take
the
class to
video.
figure this out. It's so
Oh,
complicated.
good.
I think if they gave you directions, I'm sure it's just adding water to rehydrate it, but I don't know how much water. I have no clue.
Pretty sure they did, because it came.
They must have given you directions.
Sure.
I hope they gave you directions, goodness.
I just hung it up on a clip on the fridge and was like, I'm not ready.
I'll think about that later.
That was in the spot. If I don't get, no, I wanted to do it, I just didn't know enough. So I had to come here.
I've made, when I started, right, so at this point, we're very consistent, but my starter's a year old now. So that means it's a really, really healthy starter, so it's really hard to make bad bread now. But back when I first started, I made some flat loaves. They were not happy. So
Just don't give up.
yeah, no, and like y'all are going now home with a starter that's a year old, so like it's a lot
Easier.
better of a starter now. Yeah, yeah.
It's a lot hardier.
It's a lot hardier. It's a lot harder to kill now, you know?
Yeah, it's very resilient.
Do we want to move plates over? What do you want? You want them over there? Okay.
Plates here. Can't believe we need more counter space.
My mom used to make homemade bread all, there was nothing better than homemade bread.
Oh, okay,
Okay.
okay, good.
I still make bread on some days.
Yep.
Kind of my thing.
Awesome.
I don't have that time. I should, but
Yes. At noon?
I never actually made the sourdough because I got
The shaping process?
when I made the crackers started.
Or like the mixing process? Yeah, started about 8. Yeah. 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 Yeah, so started at 8, and then by noon or 1, you would be able to do your thing. Oh, if you don't have a heating mat, also, if you're running laundry and you're running your dryer tomorrow, stick it in there. Yeah. In your laundry room. Not in the dryer.
Not in the dryer. Yeah.
And you can also, you can like if you heat your oven to like 200 and then turn it off, you can just stick it in there. Like when it's rising, I wouldn't do your activation in that because that might be too hot for the yeast. But when you're doing your rising, you could do that to kind of help it if your kitchen's really cold. Or some people will turn on their light. It depends on how low you can get it. Because they really like 70. And so I would like even if you preheat your oven, I would prop it open with like a wooden spoon or something. So yeah. Yeah. Oh, the liner, the cloth? Yeah. Well, because if y'all noticed when I poured it out, the cloth came with it and then pulled away. So yeah. Yeah.
They like 70 degrees for the activating part.
Yeah, they honestly like between 68 and 74 is like the ideal temperature. Our kitchen gets a little colder than that, which is why we tend to use the heating mat during winter. Sorry, I went a little out of order, so the crackers weren't done at the same time as usual.
Well, I mean, we started with, this is how you cut.
That's how I started the last class, though. So.
Well, yeah. Well, it's because we never demoed that part, and then there was.
But then people kept asking me questions, and I was like, fine.
I like that you asked that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Maybe you'll have a better success this time since it's not only a 3-month-old starter.
Well, so
Or did y'all go out of town?
I have 3 weeks of business travel in my life. And quite honestly, when I got home, I was too busy to
Do it, yeah.
It was my own fault.
Yeah. Well, like when we go home for Christmas, like I have to be really purposeful to like feed it before we leave, and then.
Shut the fuck up. He is more of a chef than I am.
He's amazing.
Yes. We complement each other well.
We always like him at our classes because he always does something like make salsa.
Yeah.
So.
So what's your best, like baker or?
I honestly missed it. We made
I know, that's what you told me.
we made a ton. And they were so good.
Well, now at least you can make them again.
I know. I figured crackers for Thanksgiving and then
Yeah, those would be a good little. And you can figure out how to make it into a tree shape.
I'm
I
gonna
feel
try
like
the pumpkin.
no. I feel like for Christmas you could do like a tree. If you do like the oval shape, you could like do like 3. Yeah. Yeah, like make it like this shape and then like tie it so that you get like the. I don't think you would get a stump. You'd have to like have something down there as a stump.
I'm gonna try the pumpkin.
Yeah, it was cute. That was Rachel's idea, so.
That's such a good idea.
She was like, do this, and I was like, okay. And luckily it worked the first try, so I was like, okay, I guess we can do this.
I don't think I've been brave enough to like put it in the
Target is
fridge
generally 10 to
as much
15.
as I
That's the problem. Yeah.
That's like,
It's I nowadays I'm so lazy. I used to be so on it.
Because like the nuance
I'm
of
so
what you have
lazy
to
now.
do
I
with
never
it.
measure how much is in that. I'm like, yeah, it's 3/4 of the way full. Oh well,
Even like
100 grams.
I think I heard you say last time.
because if you don't order enough, you limit your revenue. But if you order too much,
I like to have more starter, but I've even done it. I've heard of people, well, they'll have like this much left and they'll bring it back.
yeah.
And so she was,
And so, I mean, like,
I grew up with
it's fine.
my dad.
But yeah, no,
So much fun though. It's
It
like
is.
I love the look of it and the smell
it's
of it.
super cute. Yeah,
Oh my gosh, I like skipped to make a profit.
it does smell the best.
Yeah. And I used rye flour in
Okay.
the cake and the crackers.
Nice.
It was really good.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, I have a friend who has a rye allergy, so I just don't bring rye into my house because I'm so worried that it's going to somehow get into the starter and then it'll be there forever.
Cracker's gonna go right here.
Yeah.
With the low, like croissant work,
For what?
the low, like,
Oh, the low one?
yeah.
The one that's like only this tall?
It's a little taller than that.
I don't think so.
It looked like it would fit with the,
Maybe the oval one?
Yeah.
That one gets a little less tall.
yeah. Even the pumpkin, I think it would have been.
Maybe.
It's taller than you think.
I don't know. When we were buying, because we just bought one because my Dutch oven broke, so I was like, fine, now I can finally get a Le Creuset. And so, well, yeah, when we bought ours, I looked at the low ones and I was like, it's too close.
It's almost the same
Depth?
core.
Okay. Oh, cordage. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I was too nervous to do it though.
I might try it and see what. Okay, that sauce is really good.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you like salsa, you talk to him. He's always doing something cool.
You need to attach that recipe somewhere.
Too bad you don't remember what you did.
Our hot wings and hot sauces class last night.
What is beefing?
I think I asked you this last time, but is the starter okay in the car?
Yeah.
For
Like,
what?
like for how long?
Just to go to the grocery store
Yeah.
instead of
Yeah.
I'll probably walk there, so maybe I can clean it for that.
Well, what do we think? Who's gonna go home and make sourdough? Yeah? Awesome. I had a question up front, and I just thought I would share too. They asked if they could get the live stream link as well. Like, y'all will get a thank you email probably in 2 days that will also have the link to the live stream for today. So you'll be able to watch the recording at home if you would like to, and you wanted to like remember something, or you had a question, or something along those lines. But just a couple notes. So as far as like upcoming classes that are close to selling out, so we are doing knife skills this week with poultry. So that one's going to be a hands-on class. Everyone's going to get a chicken, and I'm going to teach y'all how to break it down by hand without cutting your fingers off.
It's a good class.
Fingers crossed. But this week, I think Thursday. I actually don't remember when that one is. And then before Thanksgiving, we have 2 that I'm really excited about. We're going to do perfecting pies, which will be a technical demonstration with some hands-on, talking about basically how to make the perfect pie, but then also how to do like really intricate lattice work and like how to make leaves and kind of fun stuff to decorate it with. That one's going to be with Elisa from Sip and Sprinkle, who's one of our favorite
Always.
bakers down in Des Moines. She wins
I know know this isn't your favorite class, though.
Why?
I know that your favorite is really egg rolls.
Yeah.
And speaking of blue ribbons, the last one I'm excited about before Thanksgiving. So I do sponsor a lot of food competitions. I sponsor all the food competitions at the Ames Farmers Market. And then I also sponsor a baking competition at the Iowa State Fair called Best in Dough, which one of the categories is sour. You can't hear me? Is it on? We could probably make sure it's on. Mine's on. Are you sure you can't hear me? What? Oh, and then it cut out here. Just come stand next to me. That's fine. Anyway, the last thing I was going to say, so we sponsor a bunch of food competitions, meaning like here at the Ames Farmers Market every year, but then also at the Iowa State Fair every year. At the fair, we do Best in Dough. One of the categories is the sourdough. I definitely recommend checking that one out. We do 4 different doughs, actually, that you can enter each of the 4 categories. But Best in Dough, being best in show of all 4 categories, wins a free Ankerstrom mixer from me, which is like a $700 mixer. It's great. Highly recommend it. Love that mixer. And then, but that leads me into the chili class that we have coming up. This chili is the award winner from the Ames Farmers Market this year. So Annalicia, who teaches a bunch of our classes, she actually has a stand at the farmers market as well. She's going to come in and teach her chili. I basically forced her to because she has won, I think, 3 years in a row now. So it's like, I'm sorry, 3's the magic number. You got to come teach all your secrets now. So definitely check those out. Those are all available on our website. And then our December class schedule is up as well. And a lot of those are filling really fast also. I know I had a couple people that were asking about one that's already sold out, but definitely check those out. Feel free to hang out if you have any other questions. Like, you're more than welcome to obviously bug us about those. But for now, I'm going to say goodbye to our friends on the live stream, and everybody have a great rest of your day. Thank you. Oh yeah, and you get 10. That's the other thing I didn't say with my intro. I also own Cook's Emporium and the shops at Clark and Main here in town as well, just both on Main Street. If you bring your recipe cards into Cook's Emporium today, you will get 10% off anything that you need, as long as it doesn't plug in. So that does not include the Ankerstrom mixer, unfortunately. But any of the little gadgets or tools or anything that we use, you can find all of that over there. You get 10% off all of it, and then we are going to start carrying some of our like more what I call like professional chef equipment. So we have like weird tongs and tweezers and things that we love using that people ask me about constantly. Those are also now available at Cook's Emporium, so you can pick those up as well. What's that? Yes, we have Dutch ovens there. We carry Le Creuset from Dutch ovens, or as far as Dutch ovens go. I only carry stuff at Cook's Emporium that I know is going to last. I don't carry stuff that you're going to throw away and